Hi, good morning, everyone. We are so excited to be back at the end of this month, the 29th, March 29th. As we're wrapping up the month, we have an amazing guest joining us today, Ms. Valerie Phillips, who is the owner of Bob Murray and Associates, a fierce Latina in her own right, and an awesome recruiter. So we're going to spend a little time this morning with her and chat about what that all looks like, what the recruitment process looks like, how to, get out there and get that job and land that job and the resources that are available. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and welcome Ms. Valerie and have her tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Good morning. I'm super excited to be here with you too and your audience. Again, I'm Valerie Phillips, president and owner of Bob Murray and Associates. A little bit of my backstory, Latina-owned firm. Very proud of that. But a little of my backstory, I'm from the Bay Area. My mom is an immigrant from Mexico. My dad's family is from Jalisco, Mexico. So kind of grew up in San Jose. It was all orchards back then. Now it's very different. So big family on both sides of my family, big Latino family and very close family. So I ended up staying in the Bay Area, kind of growing up, going to school there, started my first job there. I was in sales and somehow landed in recruiting. I couldn't even really tell you how that happened. I got recruited to be a recruiter. So I started recruiting, and I've done all different types of recruiting. I've worked on site with high tech companies pre-IPO, either staffing from everything from receptionist to CEO. I've done conducted retained searches for C-level folks for high tech companies, again, public and private. Did that for probably close to 15 years. Actually met my husband, Gary. We both worked in the Tech Mart building, which is right across from, Levi Stadium, the 49er Stadium right there in Santa Clara. And met him there, and he worked for Sun Microsystems at the time, and he was building organizations. And, we got married, I kept recruiting, did some consulting, worked on site up until I had my first son, who just graduated from San Jose State. And then we moved to the Roseville area, which is near Sacramento. I met Bob via LinkedIn, and I met with him, and he ended up hiring me as a part-time kind of consultant recruiter. And about a year and a half later, I bought the firm from him. So I always like to tell people I'm Bob, or Roberto, as we said earlier today. I'm the new Bob Murray. And Bob Murray and Associates is an executive search firm that conducts retained searches for executive level searches only. So we don't do staffing at supervisor manager level. Typically, it's usually kind of what we call like C-level positions, like city manager, CEO, executive director, chief building official. So those level positions for municipalities. We focus mainly on the 11 Western states. We do work in Texas as well. We have a recruiter there now. She's a retired chief from Salinas, Latina, Adele Frazee. And so we do focus municipalities. We do state, local government, county, special district, as well as quite a few nonprofit executive searches. And so I'd love to kind of talk to folks today about, what we see the trends are for recruiting. Everything was Zoom when COVID hit. A lot of that, we're going back into in-person interviews for at least the final round of interviews for recruitments. But we're still utilizing technology for Zoom for, preliminary interviews as well as first round of interviews. And I can kind of talk to in a kind of an executive search process, but I also can talk to you guys a little bit about how to make that next step in your career and some tips. So we can go in any direction or all directions today. So I've got a lot to say, but I don't want to assume that I know what everyone wants to hear from me.
So, we do encourage our audience to ask questions. If you ever ask questions, you have one of the top recruiters on here with us today. So please ask your questions. I don't think any question's silly, because I sat on so many interview panels, and I can tell you with my own experience that every city looks for something different, and you might be the candidate for one city but not be the candidate for another city. So you shouldn't let that get that, what we call that Dear John letter kind of hurt you and keep you from moving forward. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you for coming on the show. I'm a big fan of you on LinkedIn. We're LinkedIn fans. The first time I saw her at the League of Cities, it felt like I knew her. I gave her a big hug, and then we started talking. And then we're like, hey, let's do our show. And then
I
so
met
we
my
are-
match. You utilize social media, both of you guys, as much as I do. I think it's a really useful tool. And that's one of my tips as well to potential candidates, is to utilize social media, but utilize it in the right way.
Yeah.
Because recruiters look at that, potential bosses will look at your social media. We do for any applicants who apply for positions.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of, I've had folks say, well, it's my business, not theirs. And it is your business, but when you put it out in public like that, it's not just your business, it's everybody's business. So we look at that. So
I'm so happy you said that, Valerie, because you're on the money. You have no idea how many times Pete and I have had this conversation within our group of professionals, where we always remind, just because you think it's private, right? Or just because you think someone might not know, or just because you're in a group and you think, the group is safe, doesn't necessarily mean that there's a guarantee that what you're saying or what you're putting out there in the world isn't going to necessarily come back, and rear its ugly head. So it's always super important to, be mindful. You're a professional, especially on social media. Things tend to come back and bite you. So I like that you said that.
Yeah, and I mean, I have two young sons, and my son that just graduated from San Jose State, he's doing a lot of our media for us right now. And I do speak to him about that. He uses Snapchat, or he uses everything. And I'm like, okay, mijo, you need to be aware, if you're out there putting your application into some of these organizations, that they're going to look at that. And they do, because he's in the film industry, acting and film, media, cinematography. Although they don't seem to care as much about that kind of stuff. They want to see the craziness, but in our world,
Right.
you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. I also like that you're moving into kind of that second phase of in-person interviews again. I think that is so fundamental. We pivoted, right, with COVID. We pivoted. We did what we needed to do, and we had the online platform to be able to vet out potential candidates. But I think there's something to be said about that in-person interaction, where you really get the essence of a person through kinesics and body language, because you're reading a person, you're kind of getting to know them a little bit more, you're seeing their comfort level, you're a little better as far as, okay, I think I get the angle where they're coming from, because on a screen, I mean, you only get what you get, right? So it's almost similar to reviewing an application on paper, but not really knowing the real deal in person. So I like that a lot, that you guys are moving towards that approach, and that would be, I think, great for departments to start doing just nationwide.
It makes a huge difference. So I will tell you, we conduct over 100 executive recruitments a year. And I'm pretty proud, I'm going to knock on wood right now, that we don't really get too many redo searches. And what is a redo search? It's when someone didn't quite work out. Either it just wasn't the right fit, or they were maybe in another process, and that was later, and then they ended up leaving to take that job. Again, that doesn't happen very often. It's pretty rare. But what we have found is that I've had a couple searches, 2 searches since COVID that I've had to redo. And it was they only interviewed the candidate via Zoom or video through the whole process. And then once the person started, they didn't realize, whoa, okay, this just isn't the right fit. Because you cannot get that fit, from a Zoom interview. You just can't.
Right.
Tough. But with COVID, we had to do that for 2 years, and our clients did. So it's interesting that now we like you said, we're pivoting back now to in-person interviews, and it makes all the difference.
Yeah.
So I always try to tell folks, even for Zoom, dress for the job, because I had people that look like they rolled right out of bed. And I'd be like, oh my God, do you not own a comb? What? Why? And I even had a gentleman who he bless his soul, he had a shirt, tie on. He forgot to change out of his robe. So
Wow.
he put his blazer on. He had his big fluffy robe on during his interview Zoom. And if he was leaving the house for an interview, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have worn his robe. So, I mean, I think things have just changed so much the past 2 years, and it feels nice going back to the new normal. I do think we're going to keep kind of our first round of interviews possibly via Zoom, but the top candidates in person with the hiring entity, whether it's the city manager or the department head director. I do think it makes a big difference. And some other, you guys had mentioned about, what are some tips, or what is somebody who wants to make it to take that next step in their career. And so, some of my tips for folks that I consider up and coming, and we really have in the past 8+ years since we've owned Bob Marine Associates, really try to develop those relationships with organizations that have members that are those up and coming. And what we do mock interviews with a lot of them. I think joining organizations that are relevant to the field that you're interested in is super important. We sponsor so many, I can't even keep count. But I think it's important to meet with like-minded folks, people that are in the industry, find a mentor. If you're really interested, set some goals, short-term and long-term, because you might think, you know what, I want to be a city manager someday. And I think that's fantastic. I think you should go for it. But what's your short-term goal? You're not going to go from possibly an analyst, entry-level analyst, to a city manager in your next role. So what are the steps that you need to take to get there? So set some short-term goals. And I always think, develop your relationship with your supervisor if you can. Sometimes that's doable, sometimes it isn't. Find a mentor, talk to your HR department about what some of your short-term goals are. Training, see if there's training that can be offered, whether it's, they have to pay for it or it's free. There's a lot of free, great stuff out there right now. And again, joining those organizations, I think that's kind of that short term. And then, set those goals and those milestones. You may have to, we use that word pivot and we use it a lot, but you may have to pivot from what that line looks like to where your end goal is. You might have to take a sidestep here or a sidestep there. Sometimes you have to leave an organization to grow. And that's not a bad thing. That happens a lot. I think not being afraid to do that is huge. There's a lot of opportunities out there right now. It's a buyer's market when it comes to candidates. But I think you really need to do your homework on the culture. Yeah, money's important, but, the culture, the organization, look at the history of it, talk to somebody who works there. I think, not just putting your application in because the compensation is really high is a mistake. And we see lots of folks making that mistake because it might not be the right culture fit. So those are like some of my tips, developing your relationships with executive recruiters. I get a lot of people emailing me or messaging me on LinkedIn, hey, blah, blah, and I try to get back to everyone that I can. I'm carrying a pretty full load right now of executive searches, but I always try to get back to someone, even if it's 2 or 3 weeks out. And I know that sounds like a long time, and I'm not trying to be rude, but it's like, I definitely want to follow up, because I always look to that person as, you're the future. You're going to be the next director in maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And I want to develop those relationships with those folks that are kind of the up and coming, or place you in that first position as a director. That's always my end goal. And getting more women and people of color to apply for positions, that's still an issue. And that's a passion of mine, of getting more women and people of color to apply for these executive level positions, because we just don't get enough. It's better. And I like to tout that our firm we do produce a really good diverse pool of candidates for every recruitment, but it's still not enough. That's why I'm speaking to groups, like this, Women Leading Government, Local Government Hispanic Network. I belong to the National Forum for Black Public Administrators. I think it's really important. I also, if I talk or walk that talk, I want my firm to reflect that as well. When I bought Bob Marine Associates, it looked a lot different than how it looks now. I've got a lot of women on my executive team now here, and women of color as well. And we represent LGBTQ as well. And so I'm really excited about that. I feel like I can speak to that, like, hey, yeah, diversity is important to me, but also my firm, look at my firm, so I'm not shy about that. And so I feel like I'm jumping all over the place a little bit, but
no, we love it. We love it.
And I've had a
I'm not saying but by the way, happy, we're coming to the end of the Women's Month, and we really appreciate being on here. Being a strong Latina, strong woman business owner, it means the world to us for us to have these types of guests. And not only that, but at a top level, you're doing what you're saying you're doing. I love it. I love seeing your stuff on LinkedIn. I love all the information that you put out there. I see that the forums that you go on, Cecilia and myself, we do that for our code enforcement group. And when we always like to segue what we do into these interviews, so when it has to do with code enforcement. Now, one of the things, and I was sharing this story with you earlier, was when I first applied for a supervisor gig. I thought I had it. I had my degree, I had experience, and they put somebody with zero experience but tons of management skills to oversee us. And in my opinion, they ruined our program. Made me super salty because I thought it was mine for the taking. And that manager walked me one day and says, "Hey, it's going to be your turn one day, just not right now." And I didn't want to hear it. I'm like, "Dude, you took my job. You know what you're talking about. You know nothing about." But in retrospect, being at a director level now, I can see, what, at that time I was immature. I wasn't willing to listen to my team. I was that young butt that thought he knew it all. And, looking at it now, it's like, it was probably a good thing that I didn't get that position. And, it actually, what you said, sometimes the pathway of success isn't in that jurisdiction. So you have to move. And that's what I had to do. And every single jurisdiction that I left, it always hurt that I left because I loved it so much, but it was for that personal growth that you talk about. Sometimes you have to take those opportunities and those chances. And, like, look at Cecilia. She was the assistant deputy billing official. And then now she's over here with me doing our thing, promoting code.
No, I think I've tried to recruit her a few times. Darn it.
That's good. You know what? There's always that for us being what we're doing, we love what we do, and we never know, because when I interview for different places, I'm interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing me.
Right.
And it's funny that you said, learn the culture is not just about compensation.
Yeah.
Loving what we do.
Right.
And being able to say, hey, this city needs me. I have a lot to offer to them, because if they just want a body to fill, I'm not really interested. I'm interested in innovating and changing the spectrum and making our profession go to that next level. To me, that's so important. And I agree with you. That's what makes good city managers. I've had the pleasure of serving under several great city managers. I also had the pleasure of not serving under some great city managers, but but at the end of the day, I think their leadership style and allowing their staff to grow is so important for me to be in that type of environment. So, and thank you for saying what you said about seeking the right place for you.
Right. No, it's so important. And I love the fact that you shared that story about being a little salty.
Yes. I was salty.
Yeah, you know what? That you're human. And rejection is not fun. I don't like it. I mean, like I told you, I've presented against other search firms and have lost. It doesn't happen too often, but it can. Yeah, exactly. But as an executive recruiter, we are the process isn't over. Even when we tell you you weren't selected to move forward. How you handle that is quite telling, and we are watching. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just how you handle the rejection really shows us who you are as a leader as well, and how you handle it. Because if you're going to be a really big jerk about it, it's like, wow, okay. It wasn't our choice. We present the candidates and the client picks the candidate. We just present the best that we can and then make that decision tough for the city manager or city council or the board. And then they ultimately land on someone. And then we let the candidates know, look, you weren't moving forward. So you have to just be mindful of how you handle that. Again, rejection is not fun, but the executive recruiter is still watching on how you handle that process. And if you are a big jerk, if you're going to, then that's telling for us, and make a mental note of that. For the most part, most people handle it okay. Rejection is rejection, but that means you're just on a path to somewhere else. That one wasn't for you.
Yeah. No, so one of the qualities and experience that you look for in these types of executive searches, because I know sometimes when I do sit on panels, people are telling me, even though it's a higher level position, they're telling me how great of a, let's say, supervisor they are when we're looking for a manager, or they'll tell me how great of a senior officer they are when we're looking for a supervisor. So what are some experiences and qualities that you look for in candidates when they're moving to that, not just that next step?
Yeah, and that's difficult. And I mean, it can be being able to be, so you're going to go from the 10,000 foot level with your answers to the 20,000 foot level. And, it's just much more broad. So being able to, you know, I think where I see the biggest hiccup and the tough part for some folks is when they have not supervised direct reports, and then they're trying to get into that next position where you are going to have direct reports and FTEs under them. That's it. It's not that it can't be done, but that's the toughest hurdle. And then I'll get people calling me, well, why am I not getting an interview? I have all this technical experience. I project manage people. That's not the same. It's a great skill and it's great to have that, but being able to say, I think getting involved with other organizations where you are managing folks, whether it's, like a mentor group, or you've got interns, it's not quite the same, but you're getting that experience. And again, I think that's where you go and talk to your boss and try to get someone that you can supervise under you. So that's one of the hurdles that I see. But being able to answer questions in a panel interview that reflect more of a higher level than what you're currently at is really important. Using we and I sprinkled throughout your interview is important, because if you just say, it's so funny, it depends on the panel, but if you just say we the whole time, then they think that you never really did it. It was a group effort, that you didn't really supervise it. So being clear on your role on projects, or supervising folks, or communication to stakeholders, on working on budgets. So I think not being afraid to brag is important. Men seem to have that down. Women don't as much. And I don't mean to be sexist here, but we women just don't sell ourselves enough. We might see 10 things on a job brochure, and we have 8 of them, so we don't apply. Where a lot of men look at that and have 2 out of the 10 and they apply. So there is still that difference. And so being able to sell yourself without coming across full of yourself, there is a difference. Yeah. So confidence, there's a difference with confidence rather than kind of cocky. And one of the things I tell folks, and I speak to this in a lot of different panels, is look, if you're going to interview for your first executive level position, maybe deputy director position, reach out to me. Let me know what the position is, and I'll send you some sample interview questions. Google panel interview questions. You can find anything on the internet. Practice. I know that sounds a little cheesy, but practice with a friend on Zoom if it's going to be on Zoom. Have them asking you the questions, answer the questions. You can record yourself and go back and watch it. You might over-critique yourself, but there's things that you can do to better prepare yourself to sell yourself. And I always try to tell candidates when they're interviewing, and this has nothing to do with the technical stuff, but to remember, to dress for the job and smile, because a smile can really kind of relax you. And I get candidates who are so nervous, they don't. I had one yesterday, and phenomenal candidate, but just didn't interview well. And it was like, didn't convey enough of that experience. And it was a lot of, scatter thinking. So I think practicing how you're going to answer questions is really important. Not just the technical questions, but what makes you an effective leader. I ask that question for every interview. So I'm letting everyone know you're going to get that question from me when I interview you. What makes you an effective leader? And I'm not going to tell you how to answer that question, but you tell me. What was something, an ethical dilemma you faced, and what would you have done differently? How did you handle it? What would you have done differently? That's not a question you always expect to get. Or what was a failure? Walk me through what it was, and what did you learn from it? What would you have done differently? Being able to speak to that, but always end on a positive. I always try candidates end on a positive note, because I think that's the last thing we're going to hear on the answer of that question. I might be getting into too much detail here, but this is just some of the things that I see for interviews, that some mistakes that folks make, or they don't really answer the question. I sometimes get folks that maybe haven't supervised folks, and they're not answering the question. They're trying to give some other answer, and it's really clear. So sometimes it's just better to be really honest. Look, I haven't supervised direct reports, but if I were to get this position, this is how I would come in my first 60 or 90 days and develop a rapport with a team, so give some examples and say, well, and I haven't done it in my current job, but I've done it as a volunteer in this organization where I supervised blah, 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 and talk about that. Or in college, I was in charge of this and I did supervise. So use some of those types of examples, but don't try to dance around it and you don't really answer the question.
And that's another question that I really wanted to have. What are some tips? Because we do ask some of these questions and they're kind of open-ended and the question never gets answered. They'll give me like a 5-minute, 10-minute spiel on something. It's completely irrelevant. And and some of these candidates are great candidates, but they just get too nervous and start talking and don't know how to answer the question. Like a simple like, tell me about yourself, and I don't hear anything about themselves. I hear about all the great stuff that they belong to. Oh, I belong
Right.
to the association, and that's cool. The association does the yada yada yada, and we dig into it for 5 minutes, and I'm like, okay, well, what about you? What have you done to be here today? So that's
Right.
another thing. And one thing I know, like on our level, sometimes we're dealing with the code officer, the code supervisor, the manager, and you're dealing more of a like 100-foot view down. One of the things I always, when people reach out to me and they're great people and they don't get the job, I'm like, look, a lot of times you don't think of it as an interrogation. Think of it as a conversation. You're going in there for a job that you're doing 20 minutes for a 20-year career. So a lot of times you have to think about it like that. Because to me, it's so important that people go in there with that expectation. I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm here. I'm going to put my best foot forward, and I want to be the best candidate that this city has. I mean, that's really the mindset you have to go into. I mean, hoping that I get the job is not the good mindset. I'm like, this is mine. This is one thing I learned from Cecilia. This is mine. I am here. I am the building control. That's her. I love it. So,
Yeah.
Cecilia.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And those are some hard hitting facts, Valerie, because for me, being on the other side of that interview panel, looking at the candidates that are before me, I'm looking for, usually three things. How they present themselves, right? First of all, how they show up, because you mentioned the robe and everything. Yes, how they show up is so fundamental, because I'm looking to see at their level of commitment for the position that they're applying for. And it usually starts with your first, that first impression that you give, right? Whether it's virtual or in person, I'm looking to see if you're committed to this, if this is really something that you want. And that usually comes across in the way that you prepare yourself physically, right? How you're presenting yourself, because this is your brand. This is what you're branding. I always tease with my kids and I say, this is a moneymaker, right? This is what I'm putting out in the world. And then second to that, if I've already had an opportunity to review your resume, then I'm going to expect that you give me some points from that resume. I'm going to expect some experience. Sometimes we get folks that have been in a specific field for more than 5, 7, 10 years, and they have almost this attitude of, well, I have all these things, they're on my resume, as you saw, and they don't expand or elaborate. And so for me, it's almost like, well, I get that, but why don't you tell me, I'm looking for like highs and lows, strengths and weaknesses. I'm looking for how you're going to interact with other team members. I'm looking for those things, and those things you get from the essence of that interview. So answering that question, the last one, answering the question fully, right?
Right.
To the extent of where you're saying, well, actually, let me just give you some bullet points, but they're going to be bullet points that are strategic. They're not just going to be like, well, I've studied all these things and I've been in the profession for 25 years, but what did that look like? Help me understand, paint the picture for myself, because this is your one shot, right? And I always tell my my mentees and my staff, when you're going for a job, sell yourself like you're wanting to go get a job at Wall Street, right? Going on Wall Street, you're going to show up, you're going to do the thing. This is mine. I own this. This is my position. You're working at manifesting that. But a lot of that comes in how you present yourself. It's a whole package deal. So I really like all the tips that you just gave, because I'm like, yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So
and I love that you said branding yourself, because that's exactly what it is. I've had to have conversations with a few candidates who were amazing. I mean, I think the world of them as people, and they're, one is now a city manager and another one a department head. But I had to give them some feedback and some tips moving forward with other searches, because they didn't get the one that I presented them. And it didn't have anything to do with their technical ability and their experience. It was how they presented themselves. And this is going to sound really shallow, but one had a suit on that looked like it was a leisure suit from the 70s. And he wasn't that old. He was young. It's like, dude, you could go to Men's Warehouse or Nordstrom Rack. I mean, I can't assume that everyone's got a couple $100s to throw down in a suit, and I would never want to assume that. But I think there's things that you can do to make yourself still look professional. Invest in something that, you only wear it for interviews, or if you're presenting to council, it's that one suit, keep it clean shirt, clean tie for men. Shine your shoes. My dad taught me that. That's the package. And so one of them, I had to tell him, I go, look, the focus was so much on the terrible suit that you had on that they couldn't even focus on who you were. So moving forward, and you know what? I just saw him. I've run into him a few times since then, and I saw him at the League of Cities, and he had a beautiful navy blue suit on and a white shirt and just a crisp, kind of bright red tie. And I'm like, looking good. I mean, so he listened. I said, I gave him a list of stores to go to that I thought might even be Rosh, places that you maybe find something inexpensive, but really update your wardrobe. And the same with women, I've had some that were really, 10-inch nails and neon pink. And it's like, okay, that's fine. I wish I could grow my nails like that. Mine are short. But in an interview for a director level position, they're looking at that kind of stuff. It's not on me to tell you, but I'm just giving you some tips. How you present yourself. It's important. So yeah, branding. Look at the mirror, at practicing the interview. Look at some interview questions. How am I going to answer that question? Practice it. Record yourself on your cell phone if you have to. Do it with a friend. I know that. I mean, I even tell city manager candidates to practice. I mean, it's really important, especially if you're not real good with technology. Being able to do that is, I think you'd be surprised on how you come across.
Yeah.
Don't be looking down on your notes. We don't want to see the top of your head. I use sticky notes, and I feel people use sticky notes. Put them on your screen. No one's going to see them, only you are, so that you're not looking down. So the worst thing to do in an interview is looking down at your notes. So so there's little things, and that's all Zoom stuff, but still,
so
all
Valerie,
things make a difference.
Get a quick question, because I sat on a couple of Zoom interviews during the pandemic, and I one thing I did is, as you can see, our lighting's on point. My lighting's on point, but I make it because I'm on the internet all the time. Your lighting's on point. You're on the internet. But I've gone to interviews where I see like a shadow or the lighting. Yes. So you're talking to the evil Dr. Claw, like, well, tell me about your leadership.
X-Files.
So we get to those things, and a lot of times, we say, hey, invest in a camera. I mean, right. If you're, you may not invest in that $100 suit, but invest in that $100 camera to make sure you have the proper lighting. Because you could
even get a lamp and put it on your desk. Yep. And take the shade off, and you'll have light on your face. Yeah. So every time I have candidates that are moving forward with the Zoom interview, I tell them, watch a couple council meetings, take a look at the city budget, revisit the job brochure, right. Make sure your technology is working, dress for the job, and make sure your lighting is good. Those are the tips I give to everyone who moves forward in an interview. It's so important. You want to be able to see the person. Again, like Cecilia said, that first impression of, on Zoom isn't the best for anyone. So give yourself an advantage and make sure all of that is dialed in.
No, I 100% agree. It's, my first suit that I did an interview panel, I actually got it from the Goodwill.
Yeah. Do what you got to do, right?
Yeah. At that time I was I believe it was a CSO, a parking enforcement officer, going into a code enforcement role. I remember, trying to go for that job, and at that time, I was in that budgetary where you said, you don't know what people.
Hey,
I get shampoo.
We have all been there. Yeah. I remember. I think when I was younger, and I'm going to age myself here, I think there was a place called Dress Barn or something like that, or where it was like really cheap suits. And I remember going, and I'm like, wow, this is great.
Yeah, and it's so important because, and this is probably not the greatest example, but I've done a lot of expert witness testimony for our field, and spent a lot of time, at hearing, rooms at court. And I'll tell you that in the hallways and passing for like traffic court or any type of other court, you usually hear the bailiff say, if anybody needs a suit, we have a loan library or a loan closet down the first floor. Go ahead and grab yourself a suit or a jacket, and for men and women. So even with that, right? If they're making it accessible, because again, you're going before somebody and you're causing that or creating that first impression, you want to show up presentable. And I want to go back to something that you just said about nails, because I got nails, and I think that just resonated with me because
I'm jealous.
well, no. My sisters would always tell me, "Aren't you going to get color or anything on your nails? Aren't you going to do this and all the bells and whistles?" And I always say, I always keep it classy at the top and fun at the bottom. So my toes are always the fun ones. I explore a little bit more and I do the colors and the things. I always try to have like a nice, clean manicure for my nails because, again, yes, it's all on the brand. It's all on how you're presenting yourself, and it's all about how people are perceiving. And even though you have a mentality of, well, this is me, yes, it is, but you still have to kind of fine tune who you are just to make sure that, again, your brand, that first impression, you're hitting it on point every single time.
Yeah, and my comment was more like for the interview. Once you get the job, fine, do
your thing. Yeah, do your thing. But yes,
have at it.
Yes, exactly. Because I've done that. I'm like, okay, I gotta go switch it up and make it nice and classy. But no, I do that a lot, and because I've presented a lot before council, and I've done testimony at the state level for legislation, that has always been on the back of my mind. I love my nails, so I'm going to keep them, but also I know that I have to kind of show up a certain way. There's a time and place for everything. That's, I guess, the opinion. But yes, you're right. Once you get that job, then you're in like Flynn, you're good.
Valerie, and it's funny because men don't have that problem with the nails so much, so, and it was funny, and I'm going to tell you another quick story. When I wasn't getting hired to be a supervisor, and I was out of the military, and I used to shave my head, and that was my look, And then one time I was talking to him, I was really honest with my HR director, and I said, "Hey, I can't. Nobody's hiring me." She goes, "Do you want me to be honest with you?" I'm like, "Sure." She goes, "Nobody's gonna hire a cholo." That's what she told me.
Oh, wow!
And
interesting.
I looked at myself, and I'm like, you know what? You're right, and that's where this hair came about. The glasses just happen to be old, and my eyesight keeps getting out of whack. But this became my look, my hair, and my thing. Once in a while, I'll throw in a Dodger hat. And sorry, I know you guys are both from the San Francisco area. I apologize.
Get you a Giants one.
Yeah. She wants to send a torch to all my hats back here.
That's too many.
No, but that became my look. This became my brand, like you said.
Right.
And it's funny because when I don't wear my glasses, people don't recognize me. And I finally got the whole Clark Kent, the whole thing. I'm like, how do you not recognize Superman? I finally got it. Like, when I don't wear my glasses, nobody recognizes me. With you, your brand is your hair, your black hair, your smile. That's you. Every time I see it, I'm like, hey, that's Valerie.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? And I think that the fact that HR director told you that, I mean, I think she did you a huge favor.
She did.
And it's hard. And it's that as a recruiter, as an HR, sometimes you have to tread lightly with some of those things. Like I told you, I gave the advice to that gentleman about his suit. Yeah. That was not a comfortable conversation. You think that would just roll off my lips because I'm always telling my husband what I think he should wear. But, just having to be careful. And I think that's why if you can develop relationships, whether it's with an HR director or a recruiter or both or a mentor, where they can be really direct with you and honest with the feedback and you're not offended by it, I think is huge. Because I think you don't realize how your branding is unless someone else can give you some feedback. And that HR director telling you that and giving you that advice, I'm sure that was like a little bit of a sting, but it allowed you to self-reflect. Me giving advice to other candidates about just quirky things or things that maybe they can fix. It's more of a physical, whether it's just behaviors maybe they weren't aware of, but being able to have that conversation isn't the most fun. But when I have a good enough working relationship with someone, I love when I can do that, and it makes a huge difference. And I just recently had that happen where I was able to kind of give some advice on just something small and physical that was happening during the interview. This candidate was unaware of, made the adjustment, got the job, just got an offer.
And I think
because the focus should be on what you're saying, not not how you necessarily look or what you're doing with your hand. I think I talk with my hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Me too. You're right. It's distracting when someone's
And I got these black nails, which, is not professional, but I love it.
But you're the president of Bob Marine, la presidente, Bob Marine
La
Associates.
jefa.
La jefa, that's right.
But you know what, that just says a lot about you and your work culture. If you can be honest with your staff and they're not offended, you build that trust. We have to have those difficult conversations, and then there's a reason why people reach out to you, because they realize that you're a genuine person, they can trust you, because when people reach out to me, they don't know me and they reach out and they ask for advice. I give them the advice when I can. And because, we come out, that's our brand. We're putting out there, they're like, hey, we're here to help you. We're here to motivate you. We're here to empower people. And this is why we reached out to you, not other firms, because we see the positive impact that you put out into the world. And we love to have that in our sphere of of network of people. You're not in code enforcement, but you know what, you recruit code enforcement directors.
Yes.
Community development directors that oversee code enforcement.
Right.
So for us, it's important for us to be able to bring that nexus into what we do, and that's so important for us. So I know we're and it's funny because an hour's almost up. So another thing is a lot of times people do land that job, and they do get that offer, and a lot of times folks are short sell themselves by not asking for what they're worth. And and a lot of times people say there's a range from A step to like F step, and a lot of times they get offered A step and they're so like jumping on it because, hey, I finally get that title, but the compensation isn't quite there, so you're taking a pay cut. So is there any tips for negotiating salary that you may have for our audience that taking that next step?
So typically, and when you're going through a search firm, I represent the client, not necessarily the candidate. So as much as I want to say you should be asking for more, I have to be careful with that because I represent the council or the city, the county. But what I do speak to is when you're making a job move, typically even in the public sector, you can look hopefully at a 10% raise minimum. That doesn't always happen. You can ask for more. I always say ask for the max that you ask for. Reach for the sky. They can come back and counter. Why set the bar low? Set it high. So look at what the outgoing director was making or manager was making, because that's all public knowledge. If it's in California, Transparent California, you can get a sense. Go to the website, look at HR, look at what the range is. If you're not working with a recruiter, otherwise a recruiter can provide that to you, or it'll be on the job flyer. And what are you worth? Why not ask for the almost close to the max or the max and let them negotiate down? They're going to be if you're working with a recruiter, they're going to tell you pretty upfront, look, they're not going to, that's the high range. They're not going to touch that. So, set your expectations. So maybe don't ask for the low, ask then maybe the next step down, let them come back and counter. It's a negotiation for a reason. You're not ruling yourself out. Don't be afraid. Just, ask for those things. You ask for extra vacation. If you're transferring, you've already got 4 weeks and they only offer 2. They can say no, but it doesn't hurt to ask.
Right.
I think, and I've just done this with some family members, helping her negotiate. And it's like, okay, you're already making this, but you need to ask for this.
Yeah.
Because if you stay, you're going to get a raise anyway. And so double that. Your raise might be 5%. You're leaving the organization, you should be asking a minimum of 10%.
Yeah.
So, those are my tips. That might be a little bit different, more of going from entry level to maybe a lead or supervisor, but I still think it applies. It doesn't hurt to ask. Put it in there. And if they say no, they'll counter. They're not going to say no and not give you the job. Let them counter. We do that here, hiring, people in my office. I like to see people be a little more aggressive in that area, but be flexible as well. If you really are not driven by the money and they come back and counter and it isn't the top, you have to realize whether is this really the place I want to work?
Right.
Even though I'm not going to make the max amount of money I thought I was going to make, but is the culture, is it the organization, is it the projects? is that what excites you, then accept the position. But always ask for near the top or the top. I think that, I say that with city managers, executive directors, department heads, manager level folks. It doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't. They get a little nervous or afraid about that, or, I don't want them. No, do it. Why wouldn't you? And you should be asking for a raise in your current organization.
Right.
Especially, if you're working your tail off and you're meeting your accomplishments and your goals, you should be in there talking to your boss.
One of the things that I see is a lot of people become afraid to ask. They're afraid to ask. And I always say, hey, if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. So you need to ask at least sometimes, and when it comes to promoting yourself, there's a lot of people that have that problem talking about, like you said, some women have problem talking about themselves, or they feel like it's arrogant to talk about their accomplishments, or even ask for for that raise. How does one get over that hump of that being too modest? I would say that's the word. I mean, how does one get over that hump? Because I'm not modest. I'm like, hey.
Oh, we know you're not. That's good. Sometimes it's kind of your personality. So that's hard when you've got that kind of personality. If that's just your personality trait to be a little more modest or a little bit more, that you're not comfortable talking about money. So find someone in your life that can help you, motivate you to do that. Put together your list of maybe your top, 5 accomplishments and great things about yourself. Have someone else write down some things about you that are fantastic. A peer or your current supervisor before you've asked them for a raise. What am I doing right? What do you see that I'm doing? What areas do I need to improve? And what do you think I'm doing? Kind of like a pros and cons list. Have them give you that feedback before you ask for the raise, and then see which list is long. You go back to your raise and say, hey, by the way, look what I'm doing really well. According to you, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So
we say we're always lifetime learners. I just, I've never thought of somebody writing a list for me. What makes Cecilia so special? I have a million things. I could tell you what makes her not special. Her laughing at me when you're saying I'm not modest. Yeah. But still, and I never thought of that. And you know what? Actually, that is a good point, because a lot of times we accomplish so much, we never take time to reflect our own accomplishments. Say, hey, I did this. You being a first generation Latina, I know I grew up not receiving the compliments like, hey, you're so good, you're so smart, you do, it was expected of you. Hey, that's your job.
Hey, I can make good tortillas, okay? And I was supposed to be a nun. That's awesome. It was never going to happen.
No, but when you get down to it, it's funny being growing in that environment. Like I never, I've been in the police department, I've been in the military, I've first graduated person. Like my parents was like, okay, whatever.
But, it's a different generation. The generation is very different. My parents were like that too. They've changed. I'm the oldest of 4 kids, not a huge family, but 4. So I've got 2 sisters, and then my brother, he's golden child. He's the baby. So Mijo could do no wrong. And so it was just different how my parents, their style of parenting, they were young. My dad left for Vietnam when I was born. And so it's just a different time. And so I think how they raised us was a little bit of a reflection of how they were raised. And so, but I grew up with a lot of strong aunts. Especially my dad's sisters, very strong opinionated Latina women. And my grandma was too. So it's just, I think that helped with me being a little bit more aggressive on what I want and going for it. But there was also that passive side where, all the men sat down and ate dinner, and then the women, we fed them, cleaned up, and then we sat down and ate. I still do that at home. I'll serve my husband and my 2 boys, and I'm standing there in the kitchen, and Gary's like, sit down and eat with us. I'm like, oh, you're right. What am I doing? It's just a cultural thing. And I'm not complaining. I love it. I mean, I love cooking and all that kind of good stuff too. And that's, instilled in my family.
And running a business and, meeting the top of the top, which is, I went through the list of your your executive searches and saw some of the people that place, and they're industry leaders within themselves. And the fact that you're able to place them and have that network, it tells. And and when they're going to do an executive recruit search, they're looking at your company because you know what,
Right.
you've done them a solid. I mean,
right. We get a lot of repeat business.
Yeah, and it tells, because you know what, just coming across from the stuff that you put out, the sponsorships that you do, the talks that you go to, it tells a lot about your industry. I mean, your personal business culture. And you know what, it's embracing, and I love it. That's why we invite you to these kind of things, saying, hey, you know what, we love what we do in code enforcement. It really has nothing to do with recruiting, but we do come through it, and we want an industry expert to say, hey, this is what we do, this is where we're at. So I really thank you for coming on today. It's it's
been fun. I'm in the business of people, so that's, and you are too, so you get it.
Yes,
you fully get it.
We live on the internet, which is fun. And people always ask, how do you get anything done, right? It's always on the internet.
We just did. I want to go back to a point that you made about asking for your wages. I had a building official once tell me, I didn't, because I questioned, why didn't I get this certain wage? And he said to me, well, you didn't ask. And after that shift my train of thought with that. And he said, you always, exactly what you said, Valerie, you always want to ask for what you think you're worth. Go with that. And you never know where you're going to land. They may say yes, they may say no, they may meet you in the middle. You never know, but you always want to ask. Don't ever sell yourself short. And that was straight from a building official. So after that, I was like, you got it. If I feel that this is where I'm at, and I like the tip that you gave on the list, is okay. Well, tell me what you think I'm doing right. Also, tell me the things that can improve. And then you come back and, well, these are all the great things. And also, I've improved all these things. So now let's talk about my wages, right? So I think that's awesome. And like you, I'm the youngest in my family of five, with one brother. So I totally get that. My golden child can never do no wrong. My boy. So bless his heart, my brother. I love him to pieces. But yeah, no, it's been such a great chat. You resonated a lot with some of my thought process, and also I've learned a lot from you as well. So that's always really, really great, and I appreciate it.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. I really, really appreciate you guys having me on. It's a great way to spend the morning.
Is it? You're a quick bump to the day. Full of energy. I love it.
It's a triple mocha. That's why.
And we're all running on caffeine, so it's. Well, thank you, Valerie, and everybody. Bob Murray & Associates, excellent recruiting firm. Great people they crank out and place in different jurisdictions. So we love it. Thank you for being an inspiration to others that, just even if they're not in a recruiting thing, just being out there, being present. It's so important. And we really appreciate your time today.
Yeah. And you know what? As we're wrapping up Women's History Month, we are so pleased that at our last March segment, we had a fierce Latina here with us talking to us about giving out their great service, branding yourself, making sure you hit those notes when you're trying to get that job, and becoming a better professional, if you will. So thank you.
All right. Fantastic.
Thank you. We will see you next week. We'll come to you with another guest and another topic. And join us on Friday with Code Concepts with myself and Rachel Patterson. That's a whole different other show. And today we feature people. We featured Valerie today. So awesome. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you again next week. Thank you. Bye.